still reacting to the news that came down about an hour and 10 minutes ago. Micah Parsons traded to the Green Bay Packers. Coming back is 2 ones, and Kenny Clark, a veteran defensive tackle, first-round pick out of UCLA in 2016. And joining us now to talk more about this is 105.3 The Fan alumni, NFL Network's Jane Slater here on The Fan. And good afternoon, Jane. Thanks for joining us. How you doing?
I'm exhausted. I'm glad it's over.
Yeah, I'll drink to that for sure. Great reporting on this story, by the way. Let me just start with that. You've been dialed, so we appreciated all your insights and all the updates. How much did it surprise you that it actually happened?
I was surprised this week when people were beginning to move differently. In other words, when I started poking around about trade offers, for the longest time I was told no, fake news. And then this week, I think it was starting on Monday, Tuesday, everyone was really moving differently the last 48 hours. And that's when we have our insiders chat. Me, Ian, and Tom were starting to really suspect something else was going on. And then when they sort of leaked today that they were looking to take offers finally, I think they had resolved that they were interested in doing this, and they wanted to see what sort of late offers were coming through. And I think the Packers made the most sense to them, getting the 2 first-round picks. We still don't know what years those are. I'm waiting for that. And then they got Kenny Clark, a defensive tackle that's a 3-time Pro Bowler. They're filling some of the spots, so to speak, along the line. When we started getting into grievances and challenging the back issue, I think that's when things started to change. I think that was one last chess move from Mugoleta and Micah, in the sense of, if you guys aren't going to move this, we're going to move it for you. And I think they started to have to ask themselves, do we want this to continue to be a distraction moving forward, or do we actually want to get something here from a really talented player, arguably one of their best players in the last generation, that they could actually go and get something for? And I think for those of us that have covered the team closely in the last couple of years, this had been something that had been speculated about. And a lot of us didn't want to bring it up because, nothing happens. But the locker room could get frustrated with Micah at times. And I think the hardest thing for me to reconcile was, it wasn't like Micah was getting in trouble off the field. It's almost like sometimes I feel like the Cowboys have a better tolerance for that. It was more of, I would describe, just a nuisance at times, a little scatterbrained. Trying to get him to really lock in, I think, was hard at times. And so those sort of things, and then add the training table incident this weekend, albeit it was small, it went back to, we want to pay somebody leadership type money, and we expect you, through your body language and your actions, to exemplify that. And by, not participating, throwing the jury, I just think all those little things started to add up, and they really asked themselves, do we want to commit long-term to this player? And, look, full disclosure, I like Micah. Micah's a different cat. I don't know if I've ever quite met anyone like him in the league. He kind of reminds me of a vintage player, he dances to the beat of his own drum. But I think ultimately Micah, too, he wants to go where he's celebrated. And I started to really feel, and I don't know about you guys, Jerry did a masterful job with Michael Irvin on the podcast, and I think made it pretty clear that, he was gonna dig in here. And I think ultimately maybe Micah knew, maybe I need to go somewhere else where I'm celebrated.
Jane, I think, obviously this is wild. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess the question would be, if were there other teams possibly involved in trying to get in on the Micah trade talks, or was Green Bay really the only one?
I don't know. I'm still working on all of that. I'll pull the curtain back. Ian Rappaport and I were yelling at each other this morning. I thought we were going to murder each other, working on this. And I think we both got the sense that something had to happen, whether that be Jerry just saying, hey, we're tabling this and we're not talking about your contract till next season. Do with that information as you will. They could have extended. I think all things were on the table on Monday. And then I think the back issue and the grievance stuff in combination with the training thing just sort of changed things. And so I was literally at Dick's Sporting Good getting my my Arch Manning jersey for Saturday, fully expecting to be back home in time for Insiders, but certainly didn't think it was going to break at 4 o'clock here on Thursday. But I'm glad it did, right? I mean, I would have hated to see this drag into the weekends. And I think ultimately it was becoming a distraction in the locker room, and it starts to wear on the players. And I think they kind of did Shoddy a solid here. Now you can focus on this team, no distractions. And I think there's now a clear message that, look, maybe some of this tomfoolery that we've allowed over the years in Dallas needs to come to an end. And I think those of us that have covered the team, and I even said this before the draft, where's the stomach that this team used to have for making some of these gutsy, bold trades? Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately both sides won here. I mean, I think Micah would have preferred to stay here, but I really think you have two egos here. And Micah's ego was, I'm a generational type player. I'm in line. Guys before me in my draft class have gotten extensions. Why is it not happening for me? And once you sort of get in your head that your employer doesn't value the way that you value yourself, I think that's where things switch for Micah a little bit.
Jane, from a Cowboys fan standpoint, just the idea of trading with Green Bay at all is just kind of ridiculous. Yeah. But I guess that wasn't something they really cared about, because we were all saying, like, you would trade him to an AFC team or something. But to trade him to Green Bay just seems ridiculous. I
just think the reason why Green Bay made sense was they were so motivated to do it. I mean, these leaks, they don't happen, leaks happen like this, almost like it was almost doing a heat check for both sides, and so that is what, hold on, I'm just getting it. There is going to be a press conference at the Star in Frisco tonight at 6:30. There you go.
Boom.
So I just got that information. So I'm sure Jerry and everybody will fill in the blanks and give us some nuance here, but yeah, that's what I've got. So a lot of this stuff is, like I said, so I will say this about the Cowboys. A lot of people have been frustrated with the Cowboys that they leak too much, or they tell you they want to trade a player like the Amari Cooper deal, and they don't get a lot out of it. I feel like they did a pretty good job here.
Jane Slater here with you in the GBAG Nation on 105.3 The Fan. You mentioned Micah and how well he was liked, disliked. Was it kind of like a T.O. situation?
No, because that's why I'm saying the situation with him is just so different. Like, different than a Zeke, different than a Dez, different than a. I don't know if you guys have ever worked with someone that just kind of irritates you. Like, they say one thing and they'll do it for a few weeks and then they kind of do another, or they're easily distracted. They're like, oh, this is going to be, my best year, and, I'm going to show up every day and I'm going to be early, and it lasts for a little bit and then it doesn't. And it's not an indictment of Micah, so to speak. I just think Micah is one of those guys that has to be constantly stimulated, and I feel like at times once Dan Quinn left, Dan was always stimulating and, reassuring, and I don't think he had that once Dan left. And, I think teams have to know how to, like, get the best out of certain people, and that can be in a workplace, that could be, and I got the sense that it got to a point where it's like, we've got, 53 other guys here. We can't just focus on giving all the attention to one.
If you had to put your finger on the one thing that made this happen, is it Jerry's ego, unwilling to lose? Is it Mulligetta and Micah kind of threatening a medical holdout? What do you think was the biggest catalyst for making this happen today?
I think collectively the organization basically went to Jerry and said, Jerry, we've got to really seriously consider, obviously we've got a team who's making their interest in this player known. They are highly motivated. If we keep him around, is it going to be a distraction to the team? Like, obviously he's digging in too. And I think at some point, maybe even Jerry was a little shocked with the medal of Micah. I'm still shocked that he just walked in, handed his trade papers to Stephen Jones, and showed up to every day at camp. You guys have been in the doghouse with the Joneses before. Like, it's uncomfortable. So Micah did it, and I was fascinated by it.
Yeah, it has been an incredible story to track. If the Cowboys were a playoff hopeful before today, what are they now? What do you think is the immediate impact on this team's ability to win?
I don't know enough about Kenny Clark and how he's going to contribute defensively along the line, right? Like, I feel like they've just been stockpiling defensive linemen. When I started seeing some of those moves, too, I was like, it looks like they're preparing themselves for something. You know, they're going to tell us tonight, well, Micah would disappear in the postseason, or you'll start seeing that, come out. I just think ultimately for a team to win, you really can't have the distractions in the locker room. Like, if you look at a lot of these teams that are successful, they're, and I'm not saying that Micah wasn't that. I'm just saying this was, when you're frustrated with your deal, and I've had this, you'll say it to this person, and they'll find themselves going, yeah, like, it's frustrating for me. And then you'll start having more and more players coming in wanting their extensions early. And I don't know. I think at some point you kind of had to reset here, and it's a hard thing to do. And I found it unfortunate that it was Micah Parsons who was held, I felt like, on some levels to a different precedent than other teams, but he also moved differently than other players. So I could actually argue all the sides on this one. It didn't have to get this messy, and it's unfortunate that those talks in March are what muddied the waters so much.
You think his back's feeling pretty good up there in Green Bay now?
I haven't gotten an answer on that. I've been asking.
Yeah, okay.
I guarantee you, Jane, if he takes a Southwest Airlines flight and shows up like in a wheelchair to get on the plane, his back will be fine by the time he gets to Green Bay.
Listen, I don't like to laugh about injuries. I think, people are dealing with whatever that is, and so I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to pile on. I'm going to personally miss Micah in the locker room because there was no media training with him. There was no BS. He gave us something to write about. I always found his quotes entertaining. And I'm sure he's got guys on the team that I know that are going to miss. I mean, Trayvon Diggs I know is going to miss him, but I almost think it sends a message to Trayvon. They already went ahead and held his contract to him about the, not being here X amount of time training. And now it's Trayvon's not going to have Micah in there, and Micah was a pretty powerful ally. So I think this is kind of a message to everyone. We're going to start doing things a little differently around here.
Hey, Jane, you mentioned about people, and we were reporting probably 2 years ago about Micah, and there are people within the organization that were kind of saying, hey, this would be a bad idea to extend him. Do you think that and the Joneses weren't the ones saying that, but it was other people in the organization. Do you think those voices became stronger and stronger as this wore on?
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of Jerry's got his favorite players, right? Like he doesn't hide it. And Zeke's been one of those guys. Dez was one of those guys. Micah was one of those guys. And I think on some level, maybe Jerry thought that his relationship with Micah was special enough that they could get this contract done the way Jerry wanted to get it done. And when that didn't happen, I think both sides really felt betrayed. I think both of them have their unique point of view on this. And I don't know if they're going to move off of it. I think some of us watching The Gambler felt like it was almost a little bit like the Jimmy Jerry thing. Both of them. I did reach out to Micah, and I was like, so are you going to talk to Jerry about this at some point? I didn't get an answer back.
Jane Slater,
let bygones be bygones. But, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wonder if, Jerry was trying to hold these people off, and the more this kind of went through, the more he said, okay, you're right. And then that's where, like they say, the Joneses weren't the ones putting all this stuff out. It was people within the organization that were.
I mean, here's what I would say. I would say that, everyone always says, Jerry doesn't listen to anybody else, that Jerry operates in a vacuum, and it's not true.
That's BS. That's total BS. Yeah.
When you start looking at, even the Mike McCarthy decision, he held on to Mike McCarthy after that disastrous loss. I think there was an element of people that were like, move on. And some of it was he didn't, want to pay, a coach to sit at home is what I was told. But I also think there was an element there of, he wanted to give him a chance. And then with Schottenheimer, I think he and Steven sat there with them and found themselves going, it was collectively as a group they made this decision. And so I think if fans are looking for some encouragement, it's the fact that, these decisions aren't being made in a vacuum. And I think ultimately, as frustrating as this looks for some, I think this was the best resolution given where it got at the very end. Like, I truly believed that some of this was posturing on both sides and that cooler heads would prevail because we've seen it so many times. But I've never seen a player make some of the moves that Micah did. And I think it just got to a point where, like, you've got two, like, immovable forces here. So you're good. I think it was honestly in the best interest. Micah's going to go somewhere where he's celebrated. It's going to be a new fan base that's excited about him. He can lean into that. And then they got 2 first-round picks, which, because they're always, winning enough that they're towards the end of the draft, this gives them some more flexibility moving forward. And you're also getting, a defensive lineman who's 30 years old and a 3-time Pro Bowler. So I don't know. I mean, both sides are going to argue this person won or this person won, but I don't think that there was another option after this week.
Jane Slater, NFL Network, thank you so much for your time and reporting on this, and we'll chat with you soon.
Look forward to it. Bye, guys.